Tonight we're in Glasgow in Maryhill Borough Hall, where Scottish Labour chose to launch their last general election campaign. With the countdown to the next one now underway, what matters most to voters here? Let's find out. Welcome to a brand new series of Debate Night. It's good to be back. Debate Night is the only show in Scotland where you get to put your questions directly to the people in power, answering them on our panel this evening. From Scottish Labour, the MSP for Glasgow, Pam Duncan-Glancy. Pam's the party spokesperson for education and skills and has been an active Labour member for over 20 years. Before politics, she worked for Public Health Scotland. Also with us tonight, columnist and feature writer for the Herald, Kevin McKenna. After spending a year studying to be a priest, Kevin started his journalism career at the Scottish Catholic Observer before going on to write for The Times, The Guardian and The Scotsman. A Yes voter in 2014, he says his support for independence now hangs by a gossamer thread. From the SNP, the MSP for Glasgow, Kelvin, a Minister for Culture, Europe and International Development, Kaukab Stewart. A teacher for over 30 years, Kaukab is the first woman of colour in the Scottish Government. Jane McCarry is a familiar figure on the streets of Maryhill, having starred as Isa, of course, in Still Game, which was filmed here. An actor for over 30 years, Jane also trained as a teacher, a role she returned to during lockdown. And finally, from the Scottish Conservatives, Brian Whittle. Brian was an Olympian athlete who represented Great Britain 45 times, now the MSP for South Scotland, and party spokesperson for business, economic growth and tourism. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. And of course, welcome to our studio audience here in Glasgow, Maryhill. It's our first time here. It's great to be with you this evening. And you can join in the discussion from home, wherever you happen to be in Scotland this evening. BBCDN is the hashtag you need right now on social media. And our podcast of the show will be available for you to download straight after this broadcast. We've got a lot to get through tonight, so let's get started. Our first question of the night comes from Ellie Kopplinger. Ellie, evening.
Hi, thank you all for being here. My question is, what is the panel's view on the hate crime bill? Do you think it's necessary, and how do we turn it into something that is effective?
What do you think, Ellie? Is it necessary?
I think it is necessary. I have been very disappointed, unfortunately, in its implementation. You know, a bill that is able to simultaneously make someone like Hamza Yusuf be perceived as the bad guy because he rightly named that the majority of prominent leaders in Scotland are white, whilst also allowing someone like J.K. Rowling to get away with what is, in my view, quite blatant transphobia on Twitter. A bill that allows both of those things to be true at the same time, in my view, is not effective, but at the same time, it's definitely true that with the rise of social media and abuse on social media, we need to be able to rein it in somehow. So I'm very interested in the panel's view on this.
Well, the view of Police Scotland was on both those occasions. Neither were hate crimes, but over 9,000 reports since the start of April. Kaukab Stewart, necessary? And how are you going to make this effective?
I do think it's necessary. I think it's really important to remember the voices that we haven't heard so much, and that is the victims of hate crime. And hate crime is something that is criminal, and it has that aggravated prejudicial element to it.
Well, aren't the 9,000 people who've reported, aren't they the victims?
So, yeah, so since it's, so that has gone down by 75%. So I think that quite clearly tells us that in the last sort of 2 weeks since it came in on the 1st of April, that many of those were actually probably, you know, mischief-making. There was so much stuff in the media about it.
Could that have been avoided?
Angela Constance has said...
Could that have been avoided?
Yeah, well, I was just about to say that, was that, you know, humility when humility is due. And Angela Constance did say in the chamber yesterday that that could have been handled better. We could have given out more information on that and done that educational piece. But she also said that with those kinds of numbers and with the narrative that was going on and the misinformation around what it covers and what it doesn't cover, I'm not sure that any amount of information would have stopped that.
Okay. Misinformation on the part of the media. Kevin McKenna, is that you?
Heard it. Heard it. Wholly unnecessary piece of legislation with the expected outcomes that most reasonable people, to quote a line from the hate bill, had expected. I mean, I've now heard Hamza Yusuf, that guy that represents Christen, a couple of weeks ago in Newsnight, Patrick Harvey, Lorna Slater, talk about the rivers of hate, the hate that's going on all over Scotland, all the victims of hate. And I'm thinking, this is getting so bad we're going to get a UN peacekeeping force at some point. I mean, Scotland is not a hate-filled country. And actually, to get back to the questioner's assertion about J.K. Rowling having, with transphobic tweets, simply not true. Unless you actually think that the protected opinion that trans women are not women is hateful. That's a protected opinion. And by the way, I do agree with you about Hamza Yusuf and his white speech. I didn't have a problem with that. What I did have a problem with, though, is yesterday when he made a reference to cis women. Now, that reference is insulting to women. It's a creation that suggests that there are different types of women. If he wanted to make that point, he could have said real women who are born with the capability to become pregnant, bear a child, have a child, feed that child with milk that only she can produce, and that no man, no matter how many dresses he puts on, no matter what wigs he puts on, no matter how many certificates he has, will change the fact that only women can do that. Not cis women, real women.
Hands up all over the audience this evening on that. Let me go to the man with the beard. There, yeah, on you go.
I think following on from what Kaukab said about what the bill does and doesn't cover, why on earth weren't women included?
Duncan-Glancy.
There's a misogyny bill that's coming. So there was the Misogyny Working Party that was chaired by Dame Helena Kennedy. And there was wide consultation, including from Engender, Rape Crisis, lots of women's organisations. And they felt that women are not a minority. We're about 51% of the population. And they felt that misogyny deserved, and I agree with that, is a bill in its own right.
When's that coming, Kaukab?
I think that there was a statement that came out that it's proceeding at pace. So unfortunately, I don't have any further information than that, but it is coming soon.
I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. But Pam Duncan-Glancy, Labour supported this.
Well, we put amendments towards that bill that would have included sex as an aggravator because we recognise that misogyny is rife and that women should have been protected in this legislation, and they're not. And the point about women being 51% of society and therefore not a minority, in statistical terms, that is, of course, the case. But then you have to ask the question why the outcomes for women are the way they are, why we experience the misogyny we do, why we're far less likely to get higher paid jobs than men, why we're far less likely to get into the positions of power than men if we are the majority, which is why I think there was a real missed opportunity in that piece of legislation to include women and a sex aggravator within it.
But you do think we need this legislation? You know, on the point Kevin was making there, that it makes us look like a hate-filled nation, do you think we need this legislation?
I think we need a robust set of measures, including legislation, to protect us against hate in our society. As a disabled woman, it worries me deeply that one of the biggest increases we're seeing in hate crime just now is towards disabled people. When I worked in the third sector and worked in equalities organisations, I was part of setting up a third-party reporting mechanism so that people could report hate crimes. I think these things are incredibly, incredibly important, but they have to be properly implemented, and this government have made an absolute shambles of this.
Jane McCarry.
I would always stand up for anyone, and I think that is so important, but I don't understand, it's too woolly. Even though it's been explained to me, I'm still not sure what it means. I don't think anybody's really clear what it means. And also, the police couldn't be, they couldn't do any more. They are stretched as thinly as can possibly be. So if all those people are going to report different things, they've already said that they're going to roll out something where they're not going to come to your house if it's a, you know, you've been broken into and it's small, or your hut, or your car windows being smashed. That's too small. So wait, if the police have got to investigate thousands and thousands and thousands, who's going to do that? Are they going to be in an office? Because what they've said is they will investigate every single one. So if that's going to be done, where are the police in the streets to protect everybody? And that is a real issue. I think they've had a 2-hour training programme online. The police don't really understand it either. And when that happens, people start to say things like, oh, we can't say what we like, we can't express an opinion. I know that's not the purpose of the bill, but things fester and things go underground and people get angry, and that is not good for society. So, yes, defend anyone who needs to be defended, but where is the money coming from to do that?
Let's just try something here. Everybody put their hands down for just a second. This is the first time we've had a chance to discuss this since the bill came in. Put your hand up if you actually understand what this legislation means and means for you.
I think so. I mean, I've been tested. I think for me, one of the issues is that it's only just been implemented. And I think it feels a bit like the debate's been hijacked by very, very controversial and negative coverage. I would really like just some space around it, just to see how it actually goes. And as Kaukab mentioned, apparently there's been a decrease in the reporting of crime since this came in. I'd love us just to wait and debate this when people have had a chance to understand it, to see where the issues are, because of course there are issues in a new bill, and see how they can be sorted out, for want of a better term.
Yes, certainly. I think week 2... reports went down following week 1. I'll come back to you in a second, Pam. Brian Whittle, what do you think? Do we need this legislation? How do we make it work?
There's a few points to make here. One, I think the Scottish Government have once again shown they can make really poor legislation from good intention. I think one of the SNP who used to be frontbench, now backbencher, made a really good point today in the debate, saying that, you know, this idea that the people who have got concerns over the hate crime bill somehow or other are supporting, perpetrators of hate, and he was absolutely correct to say it's a really daft position to take, because that would mean people like the Police Federation and Lord Hope and all those sort of people are also then in that category. I think the reality of the hate crime bill is what you've said, it's woolly. It's extremely woolly. And in terms of, when you talked, Madam, you talked in terms of time, this bill was passed in 2021. Warned way back then, when we tried to, a lot of us tried to make amendments to the bill to strengthen the bill to make sure everybody understood the bill. Those concerns were pushed to the side, and every single one of those concerns has come true. And you've said there's 9,000 criminal, they had to be investigated by the police, and you're absolutely right. If you have to investigate every single one of those 9,000, and there's only 3.2% of them actually were actually hate crimes, that means, you know, that there's people in the northeast of Scotland now. You're not investigating burglaries if you didn't have CCTV. They're not looking into, you know, smashing in of your car windows. So the police are under extraordinary pressure. So it's really, really important that when we create this kind of legislation, we create good legislation and clear legislation. And this is just not that. It's not that. And I think
this is very similar legislation to England.
It's not.
Actually,
that is absolutely
it is very similar.
Absolutely not
and it wasn't
true.
controversial
Not
down
true.
there.
Not
and
true.
in many ways, a
It's
part
not
of it
true.
was pulling it together.
It's completely
and
different.
yeah, so it's a very disingenuous position that you're taking there.
You've actually just told a mistruth. It is nothing like the UK legislation. It is nothing like it. And to say that to this audience here is misrepresenting.
If anything, then, the difference is that the thresholds are actually higher up here.
No, they're not.
They are higher.
They reach into your home. They reach into every single one of your homes.
Let's hear from the audience, who seem to be the ones most confused about it here. Lady with the glasses here.
My concern, basically, when I heard about this bill on Radio 4, as per usual, was my extraordinary incandescence at the fact that women, as usual, had been overlooked in this legislation, and they're going to be dealt with in terms of hate crime at a later date. We're more than 51% of the population. We should have been first, before everything else. And I'm speaking as a woman of colour as well. And I've been subject to discrimination all my life. My parents were a mixed marriage in the 50s, so get your head around that. It was difficult for them then. Yeah. So I'm speaking with a foot in both camps here. And I really think kicking the female ball down the road is just another, you know, a cross we have to bear as women. And I just think it's extraordinarily unfair, and it's the wrong way round. They should have dealt with us first and then dealt with the rest of us.
Thank you, thank you. Man in the blue shirt at the back.
I'm genuinely not sure why we need the legislation. I think a lot of the discussion and the annoyance about it is people trying to get a place on the list of people who can be hated. We've got perfectly good common law of breach of the peace in Scotland, which covers, you know, all of the legislation as far as I can see, without actually, you know, listing all the people. It's open to anyone. It's everyone in the country. So I don't know why we need to legislate against it.
Thank you. Let me just go back to Ellie, who asked the question. I noticed you didn't put your hand up when I asked who understands the legislation and what it means.
Yeah, it is a little complicated. I admit that I think it's a little complicated, but I want to come back to what you were saying earlier about the piece about women and kind of centering the right voices throughout this process. I think this legislation is absolutely necessary when you've got opinions like from Kevin here that absolutely negate the existence of trans women who have existed for centuries, if not millennium. This is not something new.
That's not what I said.
And in conjunction with that, when you have people, when you have, yeah, you did. You just said that cis women is talking about a real women, which implies that trans women are not, and that's not fair or true.
Negate their existence?
What do you exactly? Because you said that cis women are real and trans women are not, and that is not factually correct. But anyway, moving on to my point.
Do you know what annoys people most with this programme is when we get away from the question, and that wasn't the question. It wasn't the question. Kaukab, let me go back to you and ask you. There's clearly problems with this. If it doesn't work, will you repeal it? I mean, you change your mind on legislation. I mean, you've rode back tonight. You've ditched a key climate change target tonight, reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 75%. You've ditched that this evening because it's unworkable. If this legislation is unworkable, you would ditch that too.
It's far too early to tell. It's been a couple of weeks, and remember, there has been lots of noise around this, lots of misinformation that has clearly taken hold, and we need some time to stand back and reflect on this. And I will take you back to the people who are being affected. There are people who have been absolutely terrorised because of either their age, their disability, their colour, and they are in their homes, afraid to come out. There are people who incite hatred on those people as well. So that has to be dealt with. Now, legislation, I admit, will not protect you from people behaving badly and doing all those things. But what it does do is that it protects you from the worst excesses of it. And the people who are committing those hate crimes, they should feel the full force of the law. But just to be
clear, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You're not ruling out ditching it.
But it's far too early to say. We've got to let it roll out. We've got to let it bed in and have a look at it. I mean, we've mentioned the police, and a quarter of the hate crimes that are reported are actually against the police. So, you know, they're in the front line. They're facing that as well. There's people in workplaces that are facing this. So we've got to go back to remembering the people that it's actually going to benefit.
And since we've got you here tonight as a government minister, this is a huge step, ditching this key climate change commitment from Scotland this evening, because it was unachievable.
Yeah, so the Climate Committee has said that, yeah, I mean, I just heard that breaking news just before I came on, so I've not had a chance to look at the background of it.
But you travel around the world in your role with international development. What message does that send, ditching that commitment?
Well, as I said, the committee said that they had their concerns on it. I'm disappointed, I have to say. I have to admit that I am disappointed with that. We are making progress on it. I mean, even just sort of like this week, the pollution levels in Byres Road, Dumbarton Road, with the measures that we are taking locally here in Glasgow, with active travel, investing in our hydrogen buses, that we are making progress on that. So I am very disappointed.
Pam Duncan-Glancy, just quickly on that. I mean, this is a huge step back, rollback on climate in Scotland.
It really is, and I think what we're seeing now is either a miss the target or a ditch the target, and that's unfortunately what we're getting with this government. And for Kaukab to make the point about the Climate Change Committee making those statements about the chances of this government meeting them were pretty much nil, and to say almost to outsource it to their decision. They said this on the basis of decisions that this government has taken that have meant they're going to miss the targets. And I think that is a real betrayal of the message that the government sent to people back when those targets were set.
And this is following a lead from the Conservatives as well, who've been rowing back on this for some time.
I think one of the things that we've been saying for ages, and I was in the environment opposite Patrick Harvey, and I kept saying it's all very well to have targets, but you have to create a route map to get to those targets. And they keep rolling back. And I mean, the home and heating strategy, we're going to retrofit 1 million homes with heat pumps. No, you're not. Who's going to do it? Who's going to service it, and who's going to pay for it? It's not enough to set a target. We're very good, or the Scottish Government are very good at setting world-class targets. But if you don't create a world-class route map to get there, you're inevitably going to fail.
Well,
this is just another one.
You also pulled back on targets. The Conservative Government pulled back on targets as well, just to be fair on that. We've got a lot to get through this evening, so I want to move on. Tonight, we're in Maryhill in Glasgow. Next week, we're going to be in Aberdeen. The week after that, we're in Galashiels. So if you'd like to come along and be part of the audience for any of those shows, just go to the address that's on your screen right now. Let's go to our second question of the night, which comes from Diane Waitley. Diane, good evening.
Can Glasgow afford another Commonwealth Games so soon after the previous one here, when the average citizen just wants potholes fixed and the litter problem sorted?
Thank you, Diane. Right, Brian Whittle competed 3 times at the Commonwealth Games, I think, starting in the Edinburgh Games, which got into financial trouble and had to be saved by Robert Maxwell, I think it was, back in the day. Should he's not around to help this time. Should Glasgow be going for these games?
Well, I've come out and said that if it's funded properly and it's sort of the cut price way in which they're looking at it at the moment, I think it's a very optimistic way and a good way potentially of bringing the inward investment back into Glasgow that's so sadly lacking. I mean, the 2014 Games was a huge success at the time, but then the follow-up to that was very, very poor, and Glasgow has slid down a very slippery slope. I mean, what a fantastic city and fantastic history Glasgow has, and it's, I mean, when you go into Glasgow now, it's depressing. So we have to look at how we reinvigorate, how we shake this the SNP administration in there who have allowed this to happen. And for me, if we can look at this from a financial term, this could be a very good way of bringing inward investment into Glasgow, reinvigorating Glasgow, showing Scotland and Glasgow to a world audience once again, but that's against a backdrop of Scottish facilities, sporting facilities across the country, swimming pools, athletics tracks, ice rinks, all closing. And that is just the wrong thing to do. It's such a wrong thing to do for communities. For me, if we can make the figures work, I think it could be a very good way of reinvigorating a city that desperately needs to be reinvigorated.
I think the promise has been that it should be cost neutral this time, that there'll be 100 million given to the city to cover costs. Dan, I think you were a volunteer, weren't you, at the last?
Yeah, I volunteered for squash at Scotstoun, and I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. But my concern at the moment about this new proposal is that inward investment is all very well, but speaking as a former scientist, I'd really like to see the figures because, to my mind, post-COVID, a lot of small businesses have gone to the wall. So the people that are really going to benefit are the big corporates, like big hotels, big food chains, etc., how much is actually going to be given into the city of Glasgow? Or how much benefit is the average person going to get, the average worker going to get? I'm not convinced. I mean, I'm a sports person, I'm totally up for it, but I just think, I need to be convinced.
OK, Jane McCarry, what do you think? Good for Glasgow?
Yeah, I loved it as well the last time. I took part in lots of different things. Not actually, I don't mean I took part in any sporting activities like yourself, but I'll just tell you a quick aside. Mark Cox and I were in the East End of Glasgow, and it was just at the time we were filming for the BBC for the Commonwealth Games, and as things do in Glasgow, people come round the pubs to sell stuff. So bearing in mind, we're in the middle of the East End, the Commonwealth Games, and a guy came up to Mark and he went, "Mate, excuse me, mate." And Mark's like that, and he went, "You want to buy a javelin?" And Mark's like that, "What?" And he started going like this, as if he didn't know what a javelin. He went, "No, I'm good for javelins." But, but it was a wonderful atmosphere. And you're right, the city does need a lift. But if it's at a cost of millions of pounds, we just don't have it. We can't do it.
Kevin McKenna.
The phrase bread and circuses comes to mind. 2014, I was around, I covered it for a couple of newspapers. It was great, it was vibrant, it was great for city. Glasgow looked great. Looks a bit less so now. However, people that I spoke to in the East End of Glasgow, especially in those communities and who lived in those streets that were making way for the Athletes' Village and one or two other developments, were significantly less so. They welcomed the Emirates Arena because, you know, everybody loves indoor cycling in East End of Glasgow. But there were people being put out of their homes, being bullied out of their homes, being told, because this is what governments do, talk down, being told that the homes they were in must be causing them lots of pain. How can you possibly live in a place like this? There was one family in particular who was the last in a block quite adjacent to where the Athletes' Village is now, who were basically chivied out of their home. There were a couple of local hubs which were forced to give way, and this funding stopped eventually. They were just, nah, you don't count because you're just the local East End of Glasgow citizenry. This is good for you. There's a legacy. There's health outcomes. You'll all be cycling around the Emirates. You'll all be duking up the hills. You'll all be kind of throwing your javelins rather than selling it to Jane in a pub. So, you know, get on board, and it doesn't matter. Your neighbourhood doesn't matter. That was the downside of it.
But they've said they'll use existing facilities this time if it goes ahead.
They always say that. I agree with. I couldn't agree more with the questioner. You know, if Glasgow were to do it, you know, it would be good. You know, why wouldn't you want an international sporting festival? The thing, and I've just thought of this. Maybe we should, because usually civic authorities, when they're hosting these global events, they spruce the place up again. So maybe that's the best way to get Sucky Hall Street looking decent.
Right, gentleman in the back, the black, yeah. What do you think?
I'd just like to give a real-life example from the... Was that me?
Yeah.
2014 Commonwealth Games. Right. In August, best of my recollection, because it was a while back, just after they'd finished, an advert went out in the Herald and other newspapers for a commercial lease on the blazed pitches of Victoria Park with no conditions on it. And I thought, right, that's how they're going to try and get the money back for what they've wasted on the Commonwealth Games, by selling off community resources. And so to me, when this is happening again, and funding for our park has been, well, all parks, I think, consistently cut year on year, I don't want more of this. A big show that's over in, what, a month or so, but cuts to the community again and again and again.
OK, thank you. Gentleman down here with the glasses. Yeah.
I'd just like to take Brian up on what you said there about Glasgow looking bad and grim. You have to look at the big picture here. The whole country's suffering. Why is it suffering? Why is there no public money? Why are businesses failing? We've had Brexit, which we didn't vote for. Scotland did not vote for that. That's costing us a fortune. We've had a global pandemic. These are the causes of these things. I would like people to come up with a vision of Scotland where we can take our place in the world, where we can join bigger sets of countries like the EU, grow our economy again, start having some vision where we're not bogged down in detail and making political points over things. We need leaders of vision, and we need to take the country forward.
Come back to you, Brian. Pam Duncan-Glancy, Glasgow MSP. Would it be good for Glasgow? Would you welcome it?
I loved it last time round. Like others have said, there was a real buzz about it. But my concern would be that I don't want to do to people who live in Glasgow what happened to them during COP26. So people who came into the city for that event were getting free bus travel, were able to use a really nice integrated card on all the public transport systems. And we're in a situation right now where the public transport SPT providers capital spending's been cut to zero, so we can't upgrade in the way that we need to. So actually, I have serious concerns about addressing some of the big problems that we've got in the city. If it means that we'll get some investment into the city and to improve some of the things in the question that you said, Diane, around potholes. I mean, literally, like someone said to me the other day, how are you getting on with your wheelchair in potholes? And I said, well, when it rains, it's a blinking submarine I'm needing in Glasgow, no a wheelchair. Like, it's really bad, right? And that is the sort of thing that we really need to be addressing.
Bread and butter issues, rather.
First and foremost. Well, we do need to sort that, because right now, if people come to Glasgow, how are they going to get around? How are they going to, where are they going to, they're not going to be able to park in the city centre because it's going to cost them too much. They're probably not going to be able to drive in the city centre. They're not going to be able to get buses or trains because we know that they're not able to turn up on time, and for some people they're not accessible at all. So all of this needs addressed. We really do need to address some of the serious infrastructure problems we've got in the city so that people can come and enjoy it again.
Back to the audience.
Absolutely.
Man in the back row.
The communities would benefit. The legacy would be really, really good in Glasgow. Unfortunately, the people outside these doors are really, really suffering. And the gentleman there to my right, I agree with what he says. They do need to rebuild, they do need to restart. But at the moment, the people outside these doors are struggling with gas and electric and feeding their kids and clothing their kids. And that's where we need to start, no spending hundreds of millions. We've seen the Scottish Parliament funds. That was limited budget, supposedly. How far did that go? We also seen the other budgets through other parts of Edinburgh and Glasgow where the Commonwealth Games will be the same. It will start at 100 odd million and it will fly, and people in our communities don't deserve that at the moment. They deserve better quality facilities locally. Glasgow Life and Glasgow City need to take more responsibility to build the legacies in local communities, 100%. Not funding things for all people from all over the world.
Man here with the beard. Yeah.
So it feels like every single time a film producer requires a setting that's dark and foreboding and gloomy, Glasgow's front and centre. We'll have the city centre closed off for people to ride bikes around for weeks at a time. Has anyone ever seen a single benefit from these big international events who actually lives here?
Okay. Thank you, thank you. We'll pick that up in just a second. Man in the check shirt. There you go.
One of the recurring topics that comes up in all these discussions is costings. It was announced in the Daily Telegraph earlier this week that the largest oil find in 20 years is about to be extracted from Scotland's North Sea. I'm just wondering, did the panel think that maybe we could just use that to pay for things, or is that money earmarked for something else?
Thank you, thank you. Kaukab, Stewart. Worth remembering maybe Birmingham, who had the Games in 2022, have just gone bankrupt as a council and raised council tax by 10%. On that man's point over there about benefits from these big events, do you really see them, and does Glasgow need the Commonwealth Games now?
Yeah, so the original question, and I've listened very carefully and I share those concerns, I have to say, we have to be in a very pragmatic place. So while Glasgow would never shy away from hosting big events, we do that very well. We did the cycling championships, we have the infrastructure there, so it's not that we're shy of it, we do it well. However, the fiscal climate at the moment is very, very difficult, and I do agree that the priority has to be our own domestic things currently. Of course, we would have the Glasgow City Council, you talk about potholes, very concerning, of course they are. Glasgow City Council would have a lot more money if it didn't have to spend the millions upon millions to settle the equal pay claim that wasn't given by the previous administration. So we need to remember that. And the austerity cuts and the cost of living crisis, the fiscal decisions that have been made down in Westminster, they have had an impact. The rate of inflation, that has affected budgets as well. So bearing all of that in mind, I think that we have to be in a very pragmatic position, and I would support it if it would not cost us anything at all. And it would have, I would have to have guarantees around that.
Okay. Let me hear from the gentleman with this over here there. Yeah.
Mentioned about city centre and parking and so on in relation to ordinary people using Glasgow. I think that it's getting worse and worse. And I think an effect of that is that hospitality businesses are struggling. They're closing. The tax base is getting less, therefore less money, and a vicious circle for more, the parking fees to go up even more, less people coming in again. I struggle to understand why the government and Glasgow Council don't seem to be prepared to listen to business at any time and to take advice from what business people who realise what it means if you don't have enough money, then you close. Whereas they seem to think that the money will just come from us.
Thank you. Your views on this and everything else you hear on the programme this evening. The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. Let's go to our third question of the night, which comes from Bill Abraham. Evening, Bill.
Hi, everybody. At the next election, in whose hands is the NHS free at the point of use safest?
Thank you, Bill. Responsibility for the NHS obviously devolved here in Scotland. Pam Duncan-Glancy, you've worked in healthcare. Is the NHS going to be safest in Labour's hands?
Absolutely, and I think we can show that. And what we've said, particularly in Scotland, what we'll do is we will tackle tax dodging so that we can raise money to bring 160,000 additional appointments into the NHS in Scotland. What we've seen under the SNP is 850,000 people on waiting lists. There are about 15,000 people who've had to wait in A&E over half a day. There are people waiting for cancer treatment that can't get it quick enough. We've got vacancies unfilled in the NHS, which means that the staff who are there are rushed off their feet, and we're really struggling to recruit new staff into the sector.
So, Pam,
the impact of that...
This all comes down to money, of course, doesn't it? Now, Wes Streeting, Labour's health spokesman, has said the extra 1.1 billion for the NHS, which Labour have promised, will only come as part of a package of reforms, including weekend working and also more private sector involvement to cut waiting lists. Is that the original Labour vision of the NHS, as people understand it?
The original Labour vision for the NHS is where you could turn up to a hospital or get a GP appointment or get the treatment that you need free at the point of delivery when you needed it. And the reality is we're not facing that right now. In actual fact, when you look at some of the data in Scotland, people who've been waiting for things like hip replacements and knee replacements are now themselves using their life earnings and savings to go private. So what we've got is a situation in Scotland, because of the mismanagement of the NHS by the SNP government, where people are being forced to go private. That isn't tolerable for me. It's not tolerable for the Labour Party either.
Bill, what's been your experience?
I am a user of the NHS. Everybody is. I have a particular condition that I do use the NHS. I don't have a problem with it. It's been good to me, it's been good to my family. Pam, I don't think Labour can trumpet their record in Wales, for example. The Welsh NHS is consistently the worst in the UK. Now, obviously, you're right to say, Stephen, it is devolved, but the financing of it isn't devolved, because a lot of the decisions that are made on financing in Westminster do have and your counterparts in the Welsh Assembly have said exactly the same thing. They say that they don't have enough money to run the Welsh NHS, and they're not even doing as good a job. And I'm very, very concerned about Wes Streeting's utterances on the NHS. Now, I don't know just how true it is, but I mean, there apparently a lot of Labour politicians receive funding from private healthcare. You know, so what kind of message does that send, and what kind of reassurance can Labour give? Because let's face it, Brian, it's not going to be the Tories that are going to be running any government at all, thankfully, after the election. What reassurance can Labour give? And by the way, sorry, Pam, you did say that the extra money is going to come from getting rid of tax loopholes. So what if you don't do a good enough job? So is that 1.1 billion going to come from somewhere else?
Actually, so there's several points to that question. The first thing I just want to say is, you mentioned that you use the NHS a lot. I've had my fair share of the NHS over the years, probably more than my fair share of it. I love it. It's an institution that I treasure. When I worked for it, I was really proud to work for it because of the work that the NHS does. And my experience in the NHS has always been of committed and dedicated staff. On the point about funding for it, well, first of all, usually we've got a track record of saying when we do something, we do it. And I think if you look back through history, you can see that that is the case in a lot of areas.
What about your track record actually in power in Wales?
But when you look at what we delivered when we were in government on the NHS, and that's the question you asked, you also said, I think we'll deliver it and will we get the 1.2 billion? I hope so, and I believe that we will, because it's not just about tackling the tax loopholes, it's also about growing the economy. And Labour's plans to grow the economy, I think, are really strong. And we know that to fund things like the NHS, to fund education, to fund public services, we need to grow the economy.
But you are saying the NHS has to change. It has to fundamentally change, is what Labour is saying at the moment.
I don't think there's anyone in the country would think that nothing needs to change in the NHS. I think it's important. Change is not scary. Like, when I worked in the NHS, we were going through almost perpetual organisational change, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because we have to change, we have to evolve with society. But what is absolutely clear is that the NHS under Labour will be publicly funded and free at the point of delivery.
OK, thank you. Man in the black T-shirt down on the front row here.
I don't think the NHS will be any better under Labour. This is going to be a different party controlling the NHS, and other promises is going to go for nothing. Right now, it's better in Scotland to be on NHS right now than any part of the UK. We are doing better than any part of the UK, but not one person is actually saying this. Well, to go backwards, like for voting Labour and Conservatives, is nonsense, because if you wanted to fund the NHS, you better have to not privatise it and keep it by as.
OK, thank you. A man with a moustache on the end here, yes.
First off, I'd like to say I think a lot of anger gets driven towards the staff at the NHS, front end, back end. It's the politicians or the government that's made the decisions that they then have to deliver. Like, my pet hate is prescriptions. So in Scotland, you don't have to pay for a prescription at a doctor, right? So somebody will go in, I know somebody that gets pizza bases on prescription because it's gluten-free or something, right? Now, you can go and buy one of them in your local shop for about £1, but by the time that all gets processed, it's probably cost the NHS about £30. Now, some people can pay for prescriptions, some people can't. I don't know how you would do that means testing, but if people have to pay for prescriptions, they're probably less likely to go to a doctor to get prescribed 40p worth of paracetamol, which means that's a doctor's appointment that's now free for somebody else, which means the waiting lists will drop down, which means all the statistics will drop down. Now, it's my personal opinion that it's a very popular policy, but it's not necessarily the right policy. You know, it trickles down.
Thank you. Kaukab, Stewart, 1 in 6 Scots on a waiting list for the NHS at the moment. In whose hands is the NHS going to be safest moving forward?
Well, the Scottish Government has sort of like put in record funding. I know that waiting lists are too long. Of course they are in certain areas. The needs of the NHS and the demands upon it have changed exponentially since it was first set up. So I think to look at it with fresh eyes is never a bad idea. Everything evolves and changes. Early intervention and preventative care, investing in that, more local provision. I think that, you know, local health centres, that kind of thing, that kind of model is certainly something that I would sort of like subscribe to. But also remember the effects of poverty on people's healthcare as well. And the austerity cuts have a huge effect on that.
It's not going to get any easier, is it, though? Because we've got an ageing population
Yeah.
with more complex and more expensive medical needs.
Yeah.
How do we solve that?
Well, I think that somebody mentioned about staffing, about the lack of staffing. I don't think Brexit helped very much with that because we lost a lot of staff. And, you know, we say that we want to attract skills and talent, especially in the care sector. We lost so many, and now we have these draconian measures coming from Westminster who are charging such high levies on, come on over here, look after our folk, work in our NHS, but actually you can't bring your family with you, but you look after our family.
So what's the
I mean,
solution?
that's appalling. That's appalling.
Roughly 1 in 3 medics say they're considering moving abroad at the moment. How do we change that?
Well, I think that we continue that investment. I think we have to continue that two-prong approach by addressing the demands, but also empowering and looking after the health and well-being of all of our population so that we can take more control and feel better, have a better standard of living. You know, it's all about nutrition, you know, all of these things. Air quality, for instance, you know, all of these things have an impact on our health.
Man with the glasses, there, yeah.
We've been speaking a lot about staffing in the NHS, and I can't see how we get away from the issues within the NHS if we don't solve the staffing issue. And I see the biggest issue around that is on our immigration policy. At present, you know, we've lost a lot of overseas workers who dedicated their life and soul to the NHS. So my question would be what is maybe a future Labour government going to do to look at Home Office policies to actually get skilled EU workers here or more international workers? For instance, a lot of students and graduates work incredibly hard here in Scotland to get a degree to then work in the NHS, and then they just can't because of visa regulations and issues. So I would like to know what's going to be done around that to counteract the current policies.
Thank you, thank you. Brian Whittle, that gentleman over there doesn't think you're going to be in government in a year's time. Whose hands is the NHS safest in?
Well, health's the reason I get into politics. It is, you know, been my passion for as long as I can think. And I should say that my middle daughter is a medic working at Cross House Hospital, and so I hear very first-hand the issues they have now. It's a very complex issue. It's a long-standing issue. I think one of the things that the NHS suffers from, or healthcare suffers from, is short-termism in politics. To solve the issues that we have within our NHS will take a long time.
You've had 14 years in government, the Conservatives.
Well, we are.
How long do you need?
Well, I will remind you, Stephen, that I'm a Scottish politician and that the NHS has devolved to Scotland. Now, Kaukab Stewart says that we invest record investment into the NHS, but we don't have enough money. You can't have it both ways. Now, the solution to this is not just about health. It's about education, how we work our education system. The gentleman there says we don't have enough medics. You're absolutely right. But if you put a cap on the number of Scottish students that are allowed to go to medical school, guess what happens? We don't have enough doctors. The actual issue, in reality, we did a study in the Health and Sport Committee last term around the cost of preventable health. Against a backdrop of Scotland being the unhealthiest nation in Europe, we have one of the most obese countries in the world. We have a problem with drug and alcohol, much greater than anywhere else in Europe. And against that, we did a study on how much preventable health costs the Scottish economy. And that came out as more than £30 billion. Now, my driving force, and always has been, and I do bore Parliament with this all the time is around the preventable health agenda. You can't just talk about it. You actually have to plan for it. And it's not just about health. I think the solution, the biggest drag in the Scottish economy is our poor health record. The way to deal with poor health record actually lies a lot within the educational environment. So we have to start thinking about cross-portfolio, and we have to start thinking about long-term. It's not 5 years. A 5-year strategy is not enough. And I think the reality is this. I think we have to dial down the politics.
Okay.
And we have to start thinking about a long-term strategy that we can all agree with.
That's interesting. Kevin McKenna, do we need to take the NHS out of politics?
Sorry, take politics out of the NHS? No. Politics is, you know, politics needs to improve.
Yep, I'd agree.
Scotland gets a third, Scotland spends a third of its annual...
Nearly a half.
From England, 33, 34 billion. So you can't fault the SNP for its commitment to the NHS. You can certainly fault incompetence. You can have a view on, do we need 32 local authorities? All the executives, all the strata of executives being paid more than 100 grand a year. You can have an issue with the billions that have been spent on consultants, primarily in health, also education, most of them. My paper, The Herald, had a story a few months ago which revealed that 50 million quid had been spent on 5 major consultancy firms on health and education. One of our rival papers revealed that of the £6 million that had been spent on the promise, you know, for children's care, £2.3 million went to consultants, went to a fancy office in Edinburgh. £2.3 million out of £6 million that was earmarked for some of the most vulnerable people in Scotland.
Are you with Labour on this, that it needs root and branch reform?
No, well, OK, root and branch reform. I don't mind root and branch reform if it also included getting rid of all private health. I think that it's an abomination in a country that calls itself socially democratic, that we basically have a better system of health for those who can pay for it. We basically, the country, the state, educates doctors. Somebody a couple of years ago estimated that something like 250 grand to 300 grand is spent by the state educating a doctor. When those doctors then decide, and I know it's not that many, but it's enough, that they're going to improve their income by taking on private health, up to 40%, they're allowed, I think. That's obscene.
Okay, all right.
The state is paid 250 grand for their education, and they decide that 40% of the week, if they want, is going to be totally at the beck and call of people earning, what, 150, 200 grand a year, i.e. not 99% of the population.
Right. Kevin, let me hear from the audience here. So many hands up on this. Man in the blue shirt first. On you go.
Yeah, as somebody that works for a baby loss charity, I want to know what the panel think about the maternity crisis in the NHS as well, because there is a maternity crisis in the NHS just now. It's, your Labour was talking about 1.1 billion they're going to invest. 1.1 billion was spent on compensation of neglect, and babies were dying in the NHS because of that.
Okay, I know you talked about this, Brian. I'm going to pick up a few points, then we'll come on. Gentleman in the second row here. Yes.
Hello. I'd like to go back to Pam. A mainstay of Labour's recovery plan for waiting lists, as I understand it, is to get people working more overtime at the weekends. Now, I don't understand that. I've got a family member just now working NHS, working at least 60 hours a week. How can the existing workforce in the NHS work any more? I just don't understand that.
Okay. Yeah, just give me a second. I just want to get some more voices and I'll come to you. Gentleman in the glasses, yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I worked for nearly, well, 27 years in a university in the city here giving careers guidance. When we were in the EU, we had brilliant students from all over the EU, Bulgaria, Germany, France, all over, and they loved Glasgow and they loved Scotland and they wanted to stay here. We need to grow our economy. That means we need the power to attract those people back. We could give them jobs, they could stay and work. It was fantastic for them. So we attracted the best people. Why? Because we're not a basket case. We're a great country with great people and great universities. But we're stymied just now. We can't take advantage of that because we're not in Europe. So we can't grow our economy by attracting those people, so we can't generate the wealth. And one other thing I'd like to say is, it's all very well to moan and moan and moan about how much the Scottish governments pay for the NHS, etc. That money depends on what we get in our pocket money from England. And if Labour get in, if Labour get in down south and privatise it as they've said they'll do, there's less public money spent on the healthcare, so we get less in our Barnett formula, and our healthcare suffers. And we don't want privatisation, and you're going to make us do it.
Okay, let me pick up these points. Jane McCarry, first, who do you think the NHS is safest with moving forward?
I honestly don't know, and I would be lying if I said I did. I don't know. And I kind of feel, you know, when you talk to friends and everybody's so confused about it, I don't know who to believe, I don't know who to trust. I think, you know, you have done a good job in lots and lots of things. What makes me feel so sad personally is when, like, my mum and dad were in hospital, they couldn't get out of hospital because there was no carers in place. So, you know, and when COVID happened, I thought at least one good thing will come out of this. We're really recognising that the folk that work in our shops, the folk that are the carers, the folk that are the cleaners, all those people will probably now, they will be recognised, they will be paid better. I've got friends that work in care homes and they would get better money if they worked in ASDA, but they feel such loyalty to the people that they look after that they don't want to leave. And it's not right and it's not fair. And that, if one thing, if that had changed and more people wanted to go into that sector, then beds wouldn't be blocked in hospitals, and that would, the whole thing would be better. I don't know who's going to improve it. That's it. I don't know. But if we don't pay people, you know, who are doing the most important jobs well, if we're only worried about the consultants and the doctors, then I think the whole thing will be broken.
Lady in the blue scarf down there, just quickly. Yes, on you go. Yeah, you. Yeah.
I just wonder if, when you mention about education, will you actually be able to promote more or less self-ownership of health in a way that people need to be made aware that health is important individually, so they need to be more, you know, information about healthy lifestyle and all those. I know it's all around, but somehow the promotion of taking the ownership of ourselves is not.
And personal responsibility. Fascinating discussion here this evening. We're out of time, I'm afraid, as always, on debate night. That's it for this evening. We're back with you next week, though, in Aberdeen. Have a look at our website if you want to come and join us there, or in Galashiels the following week. If you missed any of tonight's show, we're on again a bit later on BBC One Scotland. You can catch it then, or any time that suits you on the BBC iPlayer. Thank you very much indeed to my panel here tonight and to our brilliant audience in Maryhill. We will be back, and of course to you at home for watching. We'll see you next week. In the meantime, from all of us here, stay well, stay safe. Good night.